Where are older leftover women headed? Let me tell you, don't think they'll just get married in a few years. If you ask me, no way. By the time they hit 40 and are still single, 90% of them will end up as lonely old women.
Why?
Let me break it down. In their early 20s, these women dated just for fun, never taking marriage seriously. Then, at 25 or 26, when their classmates and friends started tying the knot, they were shocked. They still saw themselves as kids, not feeling any urgency. If they met someone they liked, they'd think, sure, why not? If they didn't, I'll just enjoy a few more years of freedom. But when they hit 27 or 28, after having their fun, reality kicked in. Most of their friends were married, and now they were the ones panicking, realizing they needed to find a husband. But at this stage, it was already too difficult.
Why?
Because women at 27 or 28 are at their pickiest and most materialistic. When they were younger, they were more naive and willing to marry for love. But by this age, they'd been brainwashed by K-dramas, toxic self-help advice, and luxury brand marketing. Their minds were filled with marriage is a woman's second reincarnation. They had to marry well and couldn't afford to settle. And what happened? They kept picking and choosing until they ended up picking themselves out of the game. By 30, when their peers were already raising kids, the panic fully set in. They dropped their pride and started actively looking. Before, they waited for men to chase them. Now, they were the ones signing up for matchmaking events. But once they entered the marriage market, they realized the harsh truth. There were no good options left. The high-quality men? Married before 30. The men who weren't good enough to land a wife in their younger years? By 30, they'd built up their careers and were making money. And guess what? They still wanted to marry women in their 20s. Men will always prefer youth. Who's lining up for a woman in her 30s? So these leftover women were left with two choices: settle for broke, unattractive, sleazy old bachelors or divorced men. And if even that didn't work, their only option was to become someone's mistress or stepmother. Some might say, but if she's beautiful, she'll have plenty of suitors at 30. Come on, let's be real. If she were truly beautiful, someone would have locked her down long ago. The only ones left at 30 are those who think they're beautiful, but aren't nearly as attractive as they believe. The media inflated their egos, led them astray, and now, the men they want won't even consider them. So they keep going on one disappointing matchmaking date after another. And before they know it, they're 38. But by then, the panic is gone. They give up and start convincing themselves that being single is just as good, that marriage isn't necessary. Sound familiar? That's right, another round of brainwashing. And the system isn't done yet. It keeps feeding them false hope. And then what? At 40, 50, 60, they become single old women. Who's responsible for this? These were women who could have had happy, fulfilling lives. What went wrong? The system. Years of subtle brainwashing destroyed them. The media, corporations, and capitalism sold them a fantasy for profit, for marketing, for money. Mark my words, in 10 or 20 years, a brand new demographic will emerge: single old women. And whose fault is it? Theirs. They were too picky in their youth. They let themselves be brainwashed. They took their options for granted. And now, they're simply facing the consequences of their own choices. What is the final fate of older leftover women? A woman from Shanghai recently shared her story online. Born in 1980, she's now 44 and has never been married. On the surface, her life looks great. She's a department manager at a multinational company, owns a car and a house, and her parents are wealthy. But what went wrong? When she was younger, her standards were sky high. She was extremely picky, with a long list of requirements for a boyfriend. He had to be at least 1.8 meters tall, make no less than 600,000 yuan a year, come from a well-off family, own his home outright, and have high emotional intelligence. In the end, she kept rejecting one guy after another, and despite years of matchmaking, she never found a husband. By the time she turned 36, reality hit hard. The men she was interested in had already married women under 30. Some wouldn't even agree to meet her. At 40, she found herself spending holidays alone with her parents while all her friends were busy with their own families. Even trying to meet up with them became difficult. Year after year, the loneliness only grew stronger. Then, last year, at 43, she finally lowered her standards and met a 52-year-old corporate executive. He made around 500,000 yuan a year, owned his home and car outright, and his parents had pensions. So at 44, she finally got married. But what was the reality? Her husband was divorced and had a son who had already graduated from college. Now she had to deal with his future, his career, buying a home, getting married, all things she would inevitably have to help with. Having a child of her own was no longer an option. Pregnancy at her age was too risky. So she had no choice but to accept being a stepmother, hoping that one day, this boy would treat her well in her old age. Before getting married, she reflected, if I could go back to when I was 25, I would have accepted that college classmate who pursued me, even if he had no car or house. This story is a cautionary tale. Older leftover women ultimately face two choices: grow old alone after their parents pass away, or accept a life without their own children and become a stepmother instead. If neither sounds appealing, they only have their younger selves to blame, being too picky, taking their options for granted. They could have found a good partner earlier, but they waited until it was too late, only to be left with regret. So to the women out there, stop blaming fate. Ask yourself, why couldn't you let go of unrealistic expectations when you were young? Why didn't you see reality sooner? The situation you're in now is the result of your own choices. If you don't want to end up alone, act while you still have time, before it's too late.
Who do women over 40 end up marrying? Ever wondered what kind of men women over 40 actually end up with? Here's the thing. These women spend their prime years being picky, refusing to settle for average guys. They'll say, I've waited this long. Why should I settle now? If he's poor, unattractive, and has nothing going for him, I'd rather stay single than deal with the headache of a bad marriage. They usually have a solid career, own a house and car, and think they're a catch. So naturally, their standards skyrocket. When they finally meet high-earning men, they assume they found their match. But reality check, these men aren't interested in them. Why? Because successful guys in their 30s who are still single either don't want to get married or are holding out for younger, more attractive women. These men have dated enough to know exactly what they want. And older, single women just aren't part of the plan. So what do these so-called high-value women do? They start looking at younger men. But let's be real. Those picture perfect older woman-younger man relationships you see on social media, they almost never work in real life. Sure, younger guys can be sweet and flirty, but when it's time to commit, they're gone. Fast. And if they do stick around, it's usually because the woman is financially supporting them. But she better keep a close eye on her bank account, because losing both love and money isn't uncommon. In the end, most women over 30 are left with just a few choices. Marry an older guy, settle for a divorced man with kids, or stay single for life. And honestly, whose fault is that? Theirs. They spent their 20s rejecting one man after another, convinced there was always something better around the corner. But time doesn't wait. By the time they realize they don't have the same options anymore, it's too late. The truth is, the more developed a city is, the more single women you'll find. Why? Because modern women are ambitious, independent, and their expectations are through the roof. In the end, they back themselves into a corner. So who's to blame? Themselves. For not appreciating what they had. For chasing unrealistic fantasies. For always believing the next one will be better. But life doesn't work that way. Once you miss your chance, it's gone. And no amount of regret will change that.